Now this story. At least 9 suspects have died in a shootout with the police in Sebokeng today. Police say the suspects were on their way to commit a cash-in-transit robbery when the shootout took place. Just over the weekend, 5 suspected drug dealers were killed in a heated gun battle with the police in Durban. Now, are police increasingly forced to use force to fight crime? And does this help? Can it help reduce violent crime? Let's bring in public safety and security expert now, Professor Jacob Mofokeng. Prof, good afternoon. Welcome to today, and thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So we are seeing how police have responded in the last few days against suspected criminals, especially those who are said to have been heavily armed and fired at the police, like in Sebokeng earlier today. This kind of approach by the police, can it help us?
Good afternoon, Braden, and good afternoon to the viewers of ENCA. The issue of force has been a very topical issue for quite a number of years now, especially after our democratic dispensation. When you look at the proliferation of firearms, in South Africa and across the continent of Africa, you realize that people will always complain, the community members will always complain about the sound of firearms, small arms, as well as automatic rifles across our communities. And when you look at, the African agenda, that by 2030 or 2020, actually they were supposed to have eliminated the sound of firearms, but sound of guns in our schools as well as in our communities, you realize that we are failing in terms of the circulation of firearms in South Africa. And therefore, then it calls then to the question you've asked whether the use of force by the South African Police Service will it be able to reduce violent crime in South Africa. It is a partially yes as well as no, because the South African Police Service will be required to arm themselves as well as to be having adequate resources to be able to respond to the challenges that are posed by drug dealers as well as cash in transit. So whilst then the SAPS needs to create a safe environment, there is also a need then for the law enforcement agencies to create that credibility as well as a safe or feeling of safety amongst the communities in South Africa. So it therefore, yes, requires that the South African Police Service needs to be able to arm themselves. The question is, will it be able to reduce violent crime? No. When you look at the issue of free trade in Africa, on the continent, there are certain bilateral agreements as well as those that are funders to the continent to say that there will be certain cargoes that will be transported from one country to the other. And then that, kind of cargo will not be inspected, when it crosses the ports of entry. So one will then ask the question, what could be there within those trucks? Therefore, we have a problem of people investing in the continent, whereas it comes with a certain, rules that we cannot be able to regulate the flow of firearms, in the continent. Therefore,
that's a very important question, that we won't be able to stem the flow of firearms in and around our continent. And as you correctly said, the guns have not yet been silenced on our continent. You could imagine that the numbers in South Africa are so staggeringly high, but we don't even have a civil war here compared to other countries. Should the police rather focus on prevention rather than using force?
Yes, it will require not only the police, but also the members of the communities. We got what we call intelligence-led policing, where we have to really mobilize the communities. So, because the police themselves alone cannot be able to prevent as much as we can secure patrolling vehicles and see more people on the street with uniform. So it requires integrated approach where all stakeholders within communities should be able to report crime, the incidents, as well as, what you mentioned earlier of cash in transit, where probably the community members might have informed the police of that will be, cash in transit. So it is very much important that we need to be more proactive than being reactive, because when we are reactive, it is where now there will be, a crossfire and bystanders will unfortunately lose lives in exchange of bullets between the police as well as the criminals. So it is very much important that we really need to emphasize crime prevention, where the police will work together with communities, and whereby the security companies also need to be able to be seen, not only for those who can be able to afford, to be protected, but, to be a holistic approach by the communities as well as the South African Police Service in our communities.
Yeah, and then, of course, we do have in this country the proliferation of illegal firearms, which cannot be traced, and that doesn't stop. And this morning, Minister Bekele in Sebokeng saying there's also a new trend. He mentioned that he's noticed that some of the weapons that they are finding from such criminals are those that are usually being used by the security industry.
Yes, if you look at the number of firearms lost either in the hands of the South African Police Service, but also the private security, then it really raises an alarm to indicate that the criminals will always target those that are carrying firearms. So it is a fallacy to say that firearms, they are used to protect individuals. So any person, especially now the private sector, the private industry, security companies, that, we know that there's the issue of training and as well as how to safeguard the firearms. It remains an elusive issue, as much as, the security industry, they train their personnel on how to use firearms, but they lose the number of firearms, and eventually these firearms falls in the wrong hands, whereby they will erase the serial numbers. And then these are the firearms that will see committing serious violent crimes, such as cash in transit, house robberies, hijackings, and the stuff like that. So the issue is then, do we have to disarm our private securities because of the issue of they lose a number of firearms? It is, again, a very topical issue, because the debate is, and then if then the South African Police Service members, they lose firearms as well, then how do we then regulate and minimize this firearms being in the wrong hands? It is something that really both the private security as well as the South African Police Service, Gun-Free South Africa, these are the issues that they have to deliberate upon, because looking at, as what you have just indicated, the proliferation of firearms in our communities. So law enforcement agencies, they need to have firearms. In the private securities, they need to have firearms, because when then, house robbery is in progress, these are the first responders, before the law enforcement, such as the South African Service, should be able to reach where the call for help is being asked. So it is important that continuous training and advanced training for security companies should be, enforced as part of legislative, so that we can be, not be confronted with a lot of firearms circulating in our communities.
Okay. Professor Jacob Mofokeng, thank you very much. You're a public safety and security expert. I wish you and your loved ones a blessed Easter weekend.